Today we are making gingerbread men, and my friend Abby is going to help me. Say hi, Abby.
Hi.
So that'll be her hands, and we're going to get started. I already have everything pulled out, and the first thing we need to do is put together our dry ingredients, and we'll go from there. Okay, so this calls for 6 cups of flour, and we're going to use 5 cups of organic wheat flour, and then we're going to use 1 cup of almond flour just to bump up the nutrition a little bit. We can't do too much almond flour though, because the cookie won't stick together well if we don't have enough gluten. And Abby is leveling off the flour right over the flour container and making sure it's an even cup, and then she'll be putting that in. A tablespoon of baking powder, and then we need to add some, it looks like some ginger, some nutmeg, some cloves, and some cinnamon, and we'll get that together. So it also calls for some nutmeg, and I like freshly ground nutmeg, so I've got my nutmeg grater and my fresh nutmeg, and I'm just going to grind up. It looks like it's a teaspoon of nutmeg. Okay, so we have all of our spices and our flours and our baking soda, and we're just going to whisk them together. I find that it makes a much better mixture, and then you don't have to worry about all of your dry goods being all mixed together correctly. And so Abby's doing that. It's a lot of volume to work with, so it's going to take us a little bit more time to get that done than usual. Alright, this recipe calls for shortening, and we don't use shortening, we use lard. So I have some lard in here, but shortening has air bubbles whipped into it. So the first thing we're going to do is put our lard into the bowl, and then we're going to whip some air into it. Okay, so we have our lard really fluffy looking right now. So then we add molasses. One thing that I do is when I'm worried about something really making a mess, I'll put something underneath it to pour it. So I just used a lid for a container, and then I poured the molasses while it was sitting on that, the measuring cup was sitting on the container. So we're going to put in the molasses, and it's really thick, so we're going to need to scrape it down to get it all in there. And we also add the water, and so here's our water. I pre-measured it. We add brown sugar. So the brown sugar is homemade, and what I do is, this is coconut sugar, and I took the coconut sugar and 1 cup of coconut sugar and 1 tablespoon of molasses, and then I blend it until it looks like this. And we need our 1 egg, our blue egg or spiling laying, so I have a beautiful blue egg to put in. And then we'll be able to mix it in. So we have 1 cup of water. We just pre-poured and put into another container so it'd be easier to not spill it. And then we have our homemade brown sugar, and we're just putting that in. And that went in real nicely. And then we have our 1 egg. And we're getting really good at cracking it and not putting any shells into it. And then we have our 1 teaspoon of vanilla. There you go. And then we need to mix this, and then once it's all creamy smooth, then we will add our flour. Okay, so now we're going to mix in our flour. We've already pre-mixed our flour and spices all together, and we're going to mix in about, I don't know, 1/4 of it per mix, and then stir it up and then keep going. That's probably good. So as usual, we've turned down the speed on the mixer to mix in the flour. Alright. Okay, so a little trick that I do is I use Klingon wrap instead of a pastry sheet or something to do my cookie dough on, because I find that it's easier to get the cookie off of the Klingon wrap than it is to get it off of a pastry sheet, even if you have flour on that pastry sheet. So we're going to roll out some Cling-On wrap. We're going to put a little flour down, and then we're going to roll out our cookie dough. And as usual, I have my guides on my rolling pin. I need to rub my rolling pin with a little bit of flour so my cookie dough doesn't stick to my rolling pin. And then we'll get started rolling out our cookie dough. Alright, so we have our first batch of cookies all cut out. Now if you'll notice, this isn't a blonde gingerbread dough like usually you think of. And the reason why is we're using so many good natural ingredients, and those good natural ingredients are not white. White is really not a particularly good or natural food for you. The piping recipe calls for powdered sugar and cream. And as usual, I'm going to make my own powdered sugar using my handy dandy coffee grinder. And I'm just going to make a whole cup right now. And then that will be my powdered sugar, and I will know that there's no other chemicals in my powdered sugar. So we have our powdered sugar that we've made, and we have some heavy cream, and we're just going to mix it together. And even if it isn't the right consistency yet, we're not going to worry about it, because instead of coloring for our piping, we're going to use some dried cherries for the red, and then for a bluish purple, we're going to use blueberries, and both of them have a liquid content, so it's going to make up for any liquid we're missing in our piping, in our icing. And again, of course, because we're not starting with bleached white food, it's not going to start out white, but it will be more red and more blue once we go further along here. So I'm just going to puree these cherries. I've added a little bit of water. I didn't want to add very much. And now I'm taking my stick blender and I'm going to puree it. It's going to take a little bit of work, and it's very messy. Okay, lessons learned here. So the cherry, even though we had hoped it would be more red, it turned out really brown. And since everything else, because we're only using natural ingredients, everything else has already kind of got a brown tint. This is just going to be a brown piping. So we decided to just abandon it. It looks like the blueberry that we're working on is going to turn out a nice purple. So we're just consolidating all our efforts into making it. Alright, so here's our blueberry piping all ready to go in a plastic bag. We are on serious time constraints, and so we aren't going to be able to pipe these for the video, so I just wanted to show you. We have a nice assortment of gingerbread cookies. They smell wonderful. If only you had smell vision.